Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. I hope you have a notepad and a pen handy because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. Now, I do have some notes that I will share with you. We're going to go through some stuff and I'll make a free download. Just go down into the description and you can get the list that I'm going through. What we're going to talk about today is a continuation of the concept of Muda, waste. Do not check out if this doesn't interest you, because I need to convince you that it should interest you. If you want to be effective in management, you need to understand. In fact, I would argue you need to memorize the 7 or 8 actually forms of Muda, the eight different forms of waste as defined in the Toyota production system. And although, don't let that freak you out if you're like, well, I'm not in automotive, that's okay. Even if you have nothing to do with automotive production, this applies to all lean management. This applies to each and every, in fact, it applies in your personal life. You can use this as an effective skill in and around your home and anywhere, but certainly in your business. Now, today is going to be the first in a series. I'm going to focus on giving you examples of not just I'm not going to give you the 7 forms of waste. We have a whole nother video on that. What I'm going to do is give you examples, and we're going to create a playlist so you can look for things. So today we're going to cover motion, and you can look for examples of motion, or also known as movement, one of the forms of waste. And these aren't in a particular order, but today, as I say, we'll be going through motion. And people reached out to me and they wanted practical examples of how they might identify the forms of waste in their business. So we can talk about this concept in a more theoretical way, but it's very useful if I give examples that you can look for in your business and you go, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. Yes, I have seen that example of motion, or as we go through the other ones. So this will be part of a playlist. Go ahead and watch through the entire playlist, or just take on this in bite sizes. Today, let's talk about motion. Now I'm going to bring up on the screen these examples, and I want you, as we go through, to maybe today's homework assignment is just make a little note where you're like, yeah, we do have that in our business to some degree. So let's bring the notes up on the screen to start off here. All right, as I mentioned, today's sample that we will be talking about, today's form of Muda that we'll be talking about and giving examples is movement or motion. There can be used synonymously, interchangeably in this discussion. And I want you to think about in your business where you have these examples. Now, in terms of motion, I put up here, think in terms of stakeholder engagement in the waste, employees, customers, vendors, management. Think if you have anyone in your business that is involved in this form of waste, in this movement. And there it's affecting your ability to be as streamlined as possible. And just to reiterate why you should care about this is that you can almost exclusively focus on the elimination of waste to create more value in your business, because as you do so, you become more efficient, you become more streamlined, and your product gets better. And your prices go down, and you can add more value. That's why this is so critical. So think of this and ask yourself again, do I have any stakeholders that are involved in emotion? All right, so here's some examples. First, let's start with the kinesthetic examples that are of your actual body, your physical body. So what about walking? So in your production methods, how much walking is involved? Remember, take notes here and just sort of, I will give you a download for these types of things, but I want you to think, oh yeah, there's a lot of walking. Can I eliminate some of the walking? Reaching. Now I just want to stop here for a second and make a point that occurred to me is, I've heard Muda described as any unnecessary extra, say, motion that's not necessary. The reason I sort of object to that, I get why it's defined that way, is I sort of object to it because I find that business owners and management tends to kid themselves and trick themselves to dilute yourself on whether or not you are that a particular form of waste is necessary. And we say, oh, well, it is necessary. I do have to walk over there. Well, of course, the way things are currently set up, it may seem necessary to do your production, but I want you to think in terms of if it exists to any degree, it's wasteful, and to the extent that you can minimize it or reduce it, you have lowered waste, therefore you become more streamlined. So I do understand that there is such a thing as where it becomes impractical. In other words, reducing the waste would be more costly, would be more wasteful than allowing the inherent waste to exist. Sort of a convoluted concept here. That's considered an investment. So to the extent that these things exist in your business, in your production methods, in your logistics, and eliminating them or minimizing them. You'll never eliminate these things entirely, but minimizing them to a greater extent than you currently have, then if that is more costly than allowing it to persist, then it would be more wasteful to try to eliminate. So you got to give thoughts to how you can eliminate these things without increasing your costs. Okay, so again, kinesthetic, walking. What about reaching? Are people reaching for things? Bending, turning, climbing. And you got to consider that there's a possibility of fatigue when people are doing these things, or injury, and that could be very wasteful. You could have repetitive stress injury, repetitive use injury, these types of things, and people just get fatigued and tired. But just any kind of motion whatsoever, even in the absence of injury or fatigue, the motion itself is wasteful, because if you could reduce that motion, things would be faster and you would be reducing wait times and things like that. Let's continue on with some more examples here. I've got, what about computer? So much is done online these days, so much is done in front of a monitor, but there's still a lot of waste, but we sort of tolerate it because it seems minute. But these things, they do add up. It's the cumulative effect that you need to be aware of. So the number of clicks, switching tabs, switching programs or apps or software, shutting down one and opening another. What about scrolling, logging in and logging out? Keystrokes or typing, data entry, all of these things are actually inherently wasteful. If you can reduce them, if you can measure these things and reduce them, and that's going to be a recurring theme as we go through Muda, is you've got to measure it. And if you can reduce these things, you will have a more streamlined process. Duplicate entries just drives people nuts, and that's very wasteful. So try in all of your various computer operations to look at these things and ask yourself, just count them. Now, of course, you're going to do all of these things. You're going to click, you're going to switch tabs. Just to operate, you have to do these things, but accept the premise that it's wasteful every time you have to do it. And if you can eliminate any of it, you're better off than you were before. Also, exploring folders is a big one. You can mitigate a lot of these things through automations, and today we're not going to get into a lot of the way that you can mitigate these things, but just to give you an idea so that you don't write it off and you say, well, I have to explore folders, I got to know where to save it. Well, can you have those in your favorites so it cuts down the length of time and the amount of motion and all the number of clicks that you have while you're exploring folders and you're searching. All these types of things on your computer are wasteful. Repetitive tasks or processes. Is there a way that you could be automating some of these things so they just occur automatically, where you have a trigger and the rest of it happens automatically? Give consideration to the motion that you are experiencing in your computer operations. All right, the other one I have is for equipment and tools. Consider the location relative to the production or work of the equipment or tools. When somebody needs a particular piece of equipment or a tool, are they walking across your facility? Are they going to a whole nother building or something like that to get the tools? Do they have to reach to get the equipment or tools, or is it right there at their fingertips? Consider the amount of movement necessary to perform the production work or task. And I'm talking in this case about the equipment or tools. I think of, as an example, what about using a wrench to turn a bolt or a nut, depending on which side you're working on, and versus a socket. So if you've got a ratchet and a socket, you know, that is an improvement, that's an innovation, that is a greater efficiency, an example of greater efficiency in a tool, where you might be able to move a little bit and still get the same job done with a better tool. So give some consideration to that. Also consider the wear and tear on the equipment. The more you have to use the equipment, the more motion involved in your equipment or your tools, you have wear and tear. It's just like when we were talking about kinesthetics on the body, you have wear and tear, fatigue that occurs on a body, on a physical worker. Also on the equipment or tools, you can create damage over time through wear and tear. What about your facility or production site? Give some consideration to that, the proximity to the workers. So is the facility located miles away from where the workers are? Is there commuting involved and travel to the work site? All these things, maybe in your business, you're like, well, most of my customers are in a particular city, but because of the cost of real estate and everything, I live on the outskirts, and you have to go and visit your customers. And maybe you have a service where you do this in your customer's place of business or in their homes, and you're commuting and there's a lot of travel. Some people are traveling across the country, even globally, internationally, for their work. And you can understand, again, we're not discussing today too much on the mitigation of these things, but you can understand where you could operate in a virtual environment. These days people have figured out, oh, I could have a virtual meeting and I don't have to maybe commute all the way down to someone's office and so forth. Excess space. I have an example. I was in San Antonio, Texas, and I toured a Toyota factory where they make the Tundra, and they had a robot that was picking up, you know, the bulk of the Tundra and flipping it around and moving it to a different part, moving it forward in the production facility. And it was just the tolerances that it was missing, hitting anything was so minute that we couldn't believe it. We commented on that. And the response we had from the people that were conducting the tour was that it would be wasteful for them to have greater tolerances because the robot does it so precisely that they don't need extra space. And if they had to, if they, just for the sake of the appearance, they made it bigger, all these gaps that they would have between equipment and everything would create the need for a larger facility, which again, in and of itself could be wasteful. So give consideration. Do you have spaces in your facility that are sort of dormant or empty, and you are causing a whole bunch of extra motion as a result of that? People have to walk across the facility to get something, and there's motion. Also, the ability to communicate. The larger the facility, sometimes the ability to communicate is compromised, or if there's a lot of motion necessary to be able to communicate, what can you do to put a communication method in place, such as maybe an alert, some sort of noise or light that can communicate, that could go across great expanses without your need to have somebody engaged in motion to do that? Can they communicate digitally with text messages, with mobile devices, and so forth? So those are some examples of motion. I just wanted to start this off and give you, we'll go through each of these individually, give you a whole bunch of examples of how individual types of Muda, types of waste, can be inherent in your business. And what I want you to do, once again, is to look at this in your business and to any degree possible, eliminate this to streamline your processes. That's where I want to leave it today. I don't want to get too in depth in these things. Maybe as part of this series, we'll also talk a little bit about how to mitigate these things. Of course, it's business specific, but I just wanted to get your mind working. That's what this is all about, is getting you think about how can you add value in your business, how can you innovate, how can you improve, and starting by eliminating waste is a really good place to start. All right, that's where I want to leave it today. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, please let us know in the comments. If you have some other examples that we should have put up on here, this is by no means comprehensive, leave that in the comments as well, because when the community reads your comments, we learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.